Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this is a very important bill, a bill that sets out, Mr. Speaker, to harmonize the anti-doping legislation of 2016 with the current developments in the world of sport. Mr. Speaker, the World Anti-Doping Agency, WADA, has been struggling world over in trying to bring sanity and discipline in the sporting activities of the world. Many times, Mr. Speaker, athletes have fallen a victim to situations beyond their control. We've had situations, Mr. Speaker, with the changing times, improving technologies, and so on, of rogue countries that have had official national sanctioned activities of doping their sportsmen and women to gain fraudulent and fake superiority and supremacy in athletics. None in this House, Mr. Speaker, understands this better than the distinguished Senator for Kisii, Senator Ongeri, with whom we have worked on some of these issues before. You may recall, Mr. Speaker, in the old days, during the communist capitalist competitions, a country that is no longer there now, called East Germany, used to be the epicenter of doping athletes. They would take to the World Games, to Olympics, athletes that used to run like machines. Professor Ongeri may remember the famous lady called Marita Koch, who used to run in superhuman form. It has turned out, Mr. Speaker, that some of those athletes were in fact literally genetically engineered to run. We've had situations, even in countries that we all copy from, like the US, have had their athletes engaged in doping. Canada has had, you remember, the famous sprinter who was smashing record after record, only to end up disgraced and stripped of all the medals that he had been awarded in various games. So this comes, Mr. Speaker, at a time when Kenya, as a powerhouse in athletics particularly, has been suffering some very poor imaging because of our athletes being caught on the wrong side of the law. This sometimes, Mr. Speaker, happens for no fault of the athletes. And scanning through this bill, Mr. Speaker, and Professor Ongeri will bear me witness because he's an authority on this, a very critical component of players in the athletes' lives has not been taken on board to the satisfaction that I expect. Most of our athletes, Mr. Speaker, are young, innocent, village-born, village-bred, very hard-working people, especially from parts of the Rift Valley, Elgeyo Marakwet, Uasin Gishu, Nandi, Kericho, and other parts of the country. Mount Elgon in our county has produced very outstanding athletes. We boast of people like the late Ben Jipcho, the legend, my good friend Kipchoge Keino, who participated in athletics in the Olympics, in Commonwealth Games, in World Games, with great discipline. They did so, Mr. Speaker, because then there was no pressure for money hunting. Athletics now has been turned into a business. I have no difficulty with our athletes making money from their talent. And I know of my friends like Moses Kiptanui, the world record holder for a long time in steeplechase, who's done very well and leads a very decent life in Eldoret and Trans Nzoia. But in between, Mr. Speaker, we have people we call agents. These are the people who go around the country scouting for young talents, no problem with that. But when you look at the history and record of these athletes, in fact, most of the money they earn goes to these agents. And it's these agents, Mr. Speaker, who hold these children like guinea pigs, using them for self-gain. They are the ones who, when they realize that an athlete is losing their power, start introducing them to enhancement drugs so that they can continue winning races and sports and generating income for them. These are the people who should be punished as and when an athlete is caught on the wrong foot. Mr. Speaker, I don't expect a situation where a young girl from Nandi, where my distinguished colleague sitting there comes from the village at Form 2, Form 3, running on the world stage. I can't imagine a situation where such a child would know enhancement drugs in the process of running. It is these crooked agents that introduce them to these drugs and destroy their careers. So I would have loved a situation, Mr. Speaker, where any agent who has administered or caused to be administered or induced to be administered enhancement drugs that fall within the doping sphere to be not only, if the foreigners, expelled from this country for ruining our children, but also to get some serious criminal sanctions, including but not limited to prosecution, and were found guilty, imprisonment as a deterrent, and thereafter removed from our soil so that they don't continue contaminating and destroying our athletes. Kenya, Mr. Speaker, is respected as a country that has produced some of the best and finest athletes in the world. We've not done very well in football, but it's athletics that has been the focus of doping. But of late, we have been seeing, Mr. Speaker, very, very fine, very promising young boys and girls emerging in athletics being caught on the wrong side. Some accidentally, some induced by crooked agents. And I would want to see, Mr. Speaker, a situation where exceptions are also applied. For example, Mr. Speaker, we have had situations where an athlete gets treatment from a recognized facility, government hospital, private hospitals, and some of the contents of the medicines that are administered, probably for whatever disease, ends up to be part of the substance that is prohibited without their knowledge. In a situation like that, Mr. Speaker, we must trace culpability to the doctor who prescribed the medicine without caution. And we can excuse such an athlete who did not knowingly, willfully, and fraudulently go out of their way to consume drugs to enhance their capability. Mr. Speaker, in bringing this bill on board, and it's a bill that is not unique to Kenya because it has been developed by WADA, World Anti-Doping Agency, and adopted by agencies worldwide so that we can bring sanity so that we do not have other Ben Johnsons. Senator Ntongeri, you may remember Ben Johnson, the Canadian, who went to an Olympics event and won all short races from 100 meters, 200 meters, 400 meters, and in each he was breaking a world record, only to turn out that he was doing this after consuming drug enhancement agencies. And he was found, Mr. Speaker, to have knowingly doped himself with his agent, and all the gold medals he had received were stripped of him. In fact, one of the medals was given to Carl Lewis, an American runner, who celebrated because when Ben Johnson beat him in the Olympics, he protested and said this superhuman running is not normal. And it came to pass that, in fact, he was right, that Ben Johnson, a Jamaican-born Canadian, had been on a mission to cheat the world. And we have had other very good and decent athletes like Usain Bolt. Usain Bolt, Mr. Speaker, has been a world beater for the last decade.